Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Somebody else said, all right, somebody, he said, I got 29%.
Oh, snap.
Oh, well, you way more than him.
Yeah, our music got the T haplogroup too. So he's interesting things are going on. That's,
wow.
You got a Natufian in your chat. Well, no, maybe not a Natufian, but you got a guy who might go quite far back.
Yeah, the other day I was in the chat on Berean TV. Everybody was excited about Dudamus getting 2.9 Israelite DNA on the Ancient DNA Origins website. So I commented, I happen to have 29% Israelite, and I actually got a reaction out of Berean, and he's like, wow, this guy got 29%, that's way more. And Abu happened to be on there. He referred to me being a Natufian. You know, he did clean it up towards the end. I'm gonna have to compare T to the Natufians because these are the most ancient genetics in Israel. It's not intended to offend anybody, any Palestinians, any Samaritans, Andean, etc. This is only intended to give my point of view, and I didn't really go into the ancient DNA because yes, you have outliers, that people that traveled. That doesn't mean that the initial cluster didn't remain incubated in its original habitat. So when you look at the diversity of T and the high frequency in certain regions, particularly West Asia and Northeast Africa, particularly Somaliland, you see high frequencies and a lot of diversity. Somalia doesn't have so much of the diversity that we know of yet, so more testing would definitely have to be done. And I happen to take several kits on there. The Judah, the Levi, and the Naphtali favor my argument for haplogroup T. It's somewhat of a pseudo website, but it's fun. I recommend, if you're into genealogy and genetics, to definitely do that test, but take it with a grain of salt. Yeah, this is just a little brief introduction before the intro, so hold tight and I hope you guys enjoy. Shalom, all praise, honor, glory, and thanks be to the Most High. This video is not intended to offend anyone currently observing Judaism or claiming to be an Israelite and observing belief systems within anything associated to the Abrahamic religions. Not intended to offend Palestinians and other indigenous people of the Near East, such as the Druze. This video is about haplogroup T. I'm excited to do it. It's gonna be a great video. I hope y'all guys is tuned up and ready for it, and as excited as I am. Haplogroup T has always had a strong connection to the Fertile Crescent. This area has the highest frequency and diversity of T-M70. Added with the fact that this region has the oldest ancient DNA of haplogroup T found today. This is the site of Ian Ghazal, dated to around 9 to 10,000 years ago. Ian Ghazal also had a FM89, that's the third oldest found, and the singleton T found that Ian Ghazal Jordan is the oldest ancient data for T. Then we go into the Peki'in Cave, where T dominates the data, accounting for 90% of all Y chromosomes. When we look at Peki'in Cave in its close proximity to the ancient city of Hazor, that's most famous for its 6-chamber gates, attributed to Solomon. One of the most fascinating things we find at the Peki'in Cave is that they had the ancient practice of ossuary burials. This secondary burial practice was believed to have only existed during the 1st century in Jerusalem and its surrounding areas, strictly practiced by Jews. But Peki'in Cave is proof positive that this is an ancient North Galilean custom. Only elite people of high status would have been afforded this luxury. It was believed only to have been practiced during the 1st century exclusively in Jerusalem and its surrounding areas by Jews. So we know that it started in northern Galilee in the Copper Age and ceased to exist after 70 AD. It is considered a typical Jewish burial, but was observed during the Copper Age, the Chalcolithic, associated with the Galilean culture of pre-Proto-Semitic speaking people. The DNA conducted by Dr. Aaron Elhaik on ancient DNA origins reports that Peki'in Cave samples of being 100% Israelite. This compounded with the fact when using the ancient DNA samples to make an argument, one must consider that the site of Abel Beth Maach, where they uncovered a Y chromosome TCTS2214 sample, which is pretty far down the T tree, way past TP77. FTDNA discovery tool reported a SMP for TFT13419, which is believed to have emerged approximately 650 years before Common Era, which is very problematic when the carbon dating for the sample is 4,500 BCE to 3,500 BCE. Possibly why Dr. Aaron Elhike is disseminating that the Peki'in Cave samples are full-blooded Israelites. We find the most continuity and diversity of T-M70 in the Fertile Crescent within a wide time range, from the pre-pottery Neolithic to the Chalcolithic on into the Bronze and Iron Age, Common Era, Erfurt, Norwich. Anywhere you find thriving Jewish communities, early converts to Christianity, later Islam. Again, Dr. Aaron Elhike with some interesting data for the Y chromosome, haplogroup T1A, with pre-pottery reports in Lakesh all the way down to 3000 BC in Lakesh. Dr. Aaron Elhike's report on Pi Ramses, which is the ancient city of Avaris. And he also reports of T1A in Media, which is the Sinai Peninsula.
Can the Israelites show up genetic as more than one Y-DNA haplogroup?
Yeah, absolutely. They're quite diverse. We've seen T, we've seen J's, we've seen CTs, we've seen E1. So I'm getting a lot of emails from African community asking if they're related to the ancient Israelites. I think possibly. They are ancient Israelites with the E1 and other letters and numbers in the data set. And like I showed you with the Viking person, this test will answer this question as well. So I've been getting those questions for years, but I could never answer. There were no ancient DNA samples, but now actually there are.
There's Mark Juherd for Dr. Elhike. Can the Y-DNA be used to trace your lineage accurately?
Depends on what you consider accurate. You have a certain Y chromosome. A person who live 200 years may have the same Y chromosome, but he may not be your ancestor.
Wow.
You guys may have the same Y chromosome, but so many other people can have it. So if you have the full Y chromosome of you and this other person, which is really difficult with ancient samples, then you have a stronger base to make this kind of claim.
What would be, I guess, in closing, would you say that, I guess, some of the E's, because most of them come back are E1s, do you believe that, or is it based on whatever your understanding is of the subject? Would you feel that some of them are a small percentage, a large percentage? What is your thoughts on that, trace back to maybe the Levant and regions like that?
First, be careful of what you read online. Not everything is correct. Look for people who actively do science, not just talk about it. Yes, some of the E1s, something were in the Israeli cohorts. You need to understand, we're looking at Canaanites, we're looking at populations who don't care about color, they may care about gender,
right?
Not so much about colors. They were all minorities. And they came from different places, looking for work, looking for a good place to herd their sheep, forming communities. They discovering agriculture, learning how to domesticate their animals, and so forth. A lot of fascinating stories. I completely understand African American fascination with the Israelites. I share it just as well. And yes, there is some basis to it, but do your own research. Don't go with people who tell you stories, because at least this one person, I don't even remember his name, did not know what he was talking about. The website that we just put is the kind of science that you want to look for if you want to get credible answers, because again, they're
The Kulubnarti in Sudan, this was a UNESCO heritage site that they had to preserve due to the flooding of the Nile and us losing a lot of this Nubian culture. These were the first early Nubian Christians. Their DNA signature is similar to the Coptic Christians, known to be formed by the Apostle Mark. Kulubnarti 6328, also 6340, dates between 700 and 900 CE, which is around the 7th century to the 9th century, during the North African Christian Age, and were found in a region known as the R Cemetery, which was considered the elite cemetery.
The Restoration-related proxy, and these are 3 ancient Egyptian individuals for which we have genome-wide data that have been previously published. So with this model, we estimated that around 60% ancestry in the Kulubnarti Nubians is Egyptian-related. However, these ancient Egyptians have also been shown to harbor a non-trivial amount of sub-Saharan African-related ancestry, which we estimate here to be about 5%. So this model doesn't really tell us the right proportion of West-Eurasian-related ancestry in the Kulubnarti Nubians, or tell us really from where that West-Eurasian ancestry ultimately derived. So we remove Egypt from our model. And we rerun this model and find that the only fitting model is one using Bronze and Iron Age Levantine populations as a source for the West Eurasian-related ancestry at Kulubnarti. And we estimate that the Kulubnarti Nubians had around 57.5% of this ancestry, though it was probably introduced to Nubia through ancient Egyptians or a group related to them. So to investigate at a higher resolution if the West Eurasian-related ancestry was introduced into Kulubnarti via sex-biased admixture, we analyzed male and female demographic histories separately. Now, what you're seeing here is how we study this. Because females carry 2/3 of the X chromosomes in a population, but only half of the autosomes, the X chromosome can be used to detect a signal of asymmetrical admixture between males and females. And you can see this illustrated here, and this is an image from Skoglund et al. 2016. Now, we used our QPADM model to compute ancestry proportions on the autosome and on the X chromosome of the Kulubnarti Nubians. So we found that West Eurasian-related ancestry, modeled again using that Levant Bronze Age, Iron Age group as a proxy, accounts for around 57.5% of the ancestry of the autosomes, but around 64.4% of ancestry in the X chromosomes in the Kulubnarti Nubians. And this reveals that West Eurasian-related ancestry at Kulubnarti was disproportionately derived from female ancestors. Now, this highlights the importance of female mobility and suggests that Kulubnarti could have been a patrilocal society. And I think this is a really important and exciting line of research to pursue further in the future.
With the Kulubnarti is that they had a S cemetery and an R cemetery. The S cemetery, the DNA was similar to the ones that they did find in the R cemetery. Genetically, these people had similar Y chromosomes and similar mitochondrial DNA. And also their autosomal composition was pretty identical. The only outlier in this whole thing was haplogroup T. T was strictly found in the elite R cemetery. Knowing that haplogroup T-L206 was found amongst the early Coptic Christians and then also amongst the Kulubnarti. Why I feel that the Copper Age population is the best proxy for the formation of the established pre-Proto-Semitic. Using the Stone Age Natufians as a proxy and their genetics, looking at the Omatic, the Cushitic, the Berber, the Chadic, and the ancient Coptic Egyptian. 5 out of 6 are so-called Hamitic, the youngest being Semitic and the only Afroasiatic language spoken outside of Africa. The Proto-Semitic language largely spoken in the 4th millennia BC, and the oldest attested forms of Semitic dates to the mid-3rd millennia. The research title, Insights into the Middle Eastern Paternal Genetic Pool of Tunisia, High Prevalence of T-M70 and Arab Populations, cites the remarkable frequency of T-M70, frequency of 17.4, prominent to refine its phylogeographical analysis, allowing to confirm its Middle Eastern origin. Then when looking at the genetics of the Omatic, the Berber, the Chadic, the Cushitic, and the ancient Egyptian, these genetics are found ancient amongst the Canaanite peoples of North Africa, the Punic, the Carthaginians, and other Phoenician areas. We understand that the Paleo-Hebrew came from the Phoenicians. That's where you get Phoenician phonetic. So elements were taken from North Africa. When you look at haplogroup T, it zigzags from Morocco at least 600 years before established Semitic. When we look at the finds at Shikrat, Rabat, and Morocco, they go back to 4800 BCE. Semitic dates back to at least 4,350 years before present, giving T more than enough time to zigzag the Mediterranean and Mesopotamian world.
Was one sound which became the basis for the alphabet.
Phonetic, you mean?
Yeah, and so we have throughout the you had workers from the land of Canaan. I think some have easily been Israelites. That's not, that's disputed, but how do you term Canaanite and what's Hebrew at this stage? And they developed this and wrote these inscriptions.
Fair use. TL208 is the most prominent among Somaliland. It's estimated to be 70 to 90%, but in greater Somalia, L208 accounts for only around 10 to 15% respectively.
Although Ebewak was one of the prominent religions practiced in ancient Somalia, there are indicators of other religions having been practiced in the region prior to the arrival and spread of Islam in the 7th century AD. For example, members of the Yiber clan often claim to have direct ancestry from the Hebrews who had migrated out of Egypt during the Exodus and were subsequently scattered throughout the Middle East and in parts of Africa, including Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. Recent historic studies partially support this claim, as some of the early settlers living along Somalia's southern coastal cities, such as Mogadishu, Bosaso, Bormama, and Borko, may have indeed practiced early forms of Judaism, as was the case in neighboring Ethiopia and in Yemen, as well as in certain regions of mainland Arabia, long before the advent of Islam.
As it happens, lines up pretty much perfectly with Hatshepsut's expedition to Punt, which is thought to have extended as far south as the aptly named Puntland in modern-day Somalia. This theory of mine becomes ever more interesting when considering the main export of Hatshepsut's expedition was the same incense that grows in abundance in this region of Somalia today. I don't know, maybe something to sit on until further excavation and testing can be done in Sudan, Eritrea, and Somalia. As for TL208, there's much speculation on just how it was introduced into the Somali populace around 2,000 years ago. The most likely theory is that TL208 Somalis descend from a South Semitic man who crossed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait into modern Djibouti, but this isn't a sure thing just yet. Other possibilities include an intra-African migration of Ethio-Semitic or Central or Northern Cushitic peoples from Sudan or Eritrea, a migration from the Levant or Hejaz region via the Red Sea, and one of a Mesopotamian patriarch that would seem to corroborate with some oral recounts of northern Somali clans. The foremost of the last three theories has recently been linked some credence with the discovery and genotyping of a Christian period Nubian from a gravesite carrying the TL208 haplogroup, common almost exclusively in Somalis within the African continent in modern times.
If Christ himself didn't have Galilean genes, the people around him definitely had Galilean. They were all Galilean. When Christ went into Jerusalem, that was amongst his ops. Jerusalem was never written in the Pentateuch. Like I said, Christ going into Jerusalem, he was going into his ops neighborhood. It was a hostile territory for Christ to go into Jerusalem. Those people had strong allegiance with the aristocratic class of the Greeks. Those people were sellouts. You cannot just determine because you find ancient DNA in Israel, oh, these are the Israelites. They could be the Amorites. They could be the Canaanites. They could be the Philistines. They could be the Moabites. They could be the Ammonites. They could be the Edomites, Idumeans. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be an Israelite. You got to keep that in mind. Somebody has to be a Canaanite. Canaanites are one of the ancestors of the Israelites. They're not the complete makeup of the Israelites. When people, even with the Natufians, a lot of people are related to the Natufians, believe it or not. If we dug up a body, and you could be related to this body, you could be genetically, this is your ancestor. Because it's 2,000 years ago, autosomally, you would be 0% genetically similar to this person. Because DNA over generations, let's just say 25 to 30 years as a generation, after 6-7 generations, up to maybe 8 or 9 generations, there's not even any traces of that original DNA that was there. So basically, we could dig up an Israelite that you actually are related to, and we do a DNA test, and you will be 0% genetically related to this person because it was so long ago. But with the Y chromosome, some people can trace it due to the Y chromosome. That's why people go with the Y chromosome. Looking at ancient DNA, its damage and how it's degraded, I wouldn't necessarily say that that is the best model to go by. We also have to go by their material culture, the architecture or the structures that these people dwelled in, their dwellings. Also, we have to look at the material culture of their burial practices. If one is similar to what we find in the time of Christ, and we find it in the northern Galilee, and then another one is more of a floral burial practice that we do not see any traces to Semitic culture. We do not have any ancient samples before the Natufians in Israel. Let's just say there's an ancient lineage before the genetics of the Natufians. Let's say we just haven't found it yet. But we don't see a sudden influx of this Natufian genetics in there. We only see it during the Stone Age, the Neolithic time frames. So we see the Natufian-like DNA in Israel before we even see the Natufian-like DNA in Ghazal. But we don't see a major population boom. We see a diverse demographic. Like I said, we have FM89, the third oldest one, in Ian Ghazal. And we had the first T found at Ian Ghazal. So if anything, it would look like these people taught the Natufian-like genetics some skills and traits, because they went from circle to square. They went from semi-pastoralists to actually having herds and more animal husbandry. It's clear at Ian Ghazal. And then later, during the Copper Age, we see the advancements in the region. It's fairly obvious. So during the Stone Age, this Natufian-like genetics was 100% of the geographical population structure, 100%. By the end of the pre-pottery Neolithic, it was about 30%. If I am a convert, I have no issue with being a convert. There's nothing shameful or embarrassing about being a convert. You could basically just look at the word converting in another term as being initiated. You can actually be part of a family but not be initiated to a certain aspect of your family's culture or customs. Similar, Christ was initiated by John the Baptist, so there's nothing wrong with proving your commitment to the broader community, not just your immediate family unit. You want to serve the Most High genuinely, with all your zeal, with all your heart, all your soul. Nobody can stop you from doing that. There's nothing wrong with being a convert. We don't know who the first converts are. If it's the Natufian-like genetics, that's some proxy closer to the Canaanite population. This is something we should consider, at least take a look at.
Convinced that they were not immigrants, Finkelstein argues that many were probably Canaanites, as were their fathers and their fathers before them.
I think that
A
the
theory.
Israelites were probably local people who were
It's not no.
probably sedentary people in the middle of the second millennium.
Israel
Then
Finkelstein
there
has
was
been
a collapse
pushing
of
this
the
for a
urban
long
culture.
time
There was
now.
a process of normalization
So
after
if
three
you
centuries
live
of
like in New
Eastern
York, you'll be a
They
New
were in a way,
Yorker.
they were Canaanites because they lived in Canaan of the second millennium BC.
And for Ami Messiah,
And then the
Israelites
similarities,
emerged from Canaan, sometimes come from
they
unsuspected
adopted, they
sources.
took on some of these Canaanite deities. Yes, if the Canaanites were the first ones amalgamated into the Israelites, this is a possibility.
It was found on a remote mountain.
Fair use. Definitely fair use on
We
this.
could date it to this time, the 12th century BC, the period of the Israelite settlement. And we believe that the place where this bull was found was a high place. That means it was a sanctuary, an open-air sanctuary, utilized by those Israelites in the early phase of their settlement there. Now, this is a very interesting find because we know that the Canaanites.
You don't have to agree with this, but
also,
this is a theory we have to consider.
Bronze bulls made in a very similar fashion. So we can claim that this little bull illustrates Canaanite traditions and inspiration on the early Israelite religion and culture.
I don't think they were Canaanites all along. I think Canaanites were the first converts.
Who are the Israelites? Because you must also be specific about a time in history. Under Joshua, did they know that they were Israelites? We don't know. We don't have enough historical evidence for this. But obviously, many people who joined in this new force were local or were from here, and it was a mixture of people, you see.
So probably you have some elements from North Africa, the Lesser Caucasus, Anatolia, and Mesopotamia.
So we have something different.
So we need more DNA testing on the Petra's
bones. I think it
bones.
is, but for the time being, we don't have an absolute proof. We need something else, which I don't know if we shall ever find. Maybe we need a lot more of the same. But I think these are the Israelites. And it's a different page in a different story.
So when we look at the Abel Beth Maach, that's fairly down the tree. When you go a couple of nodes down from there, you get the Erfurt finds. So now we find it in contemporary Jews. Also with the chapel field, we find what was the antisemitic massacre that occurred where they had these bodies in the well. We also find a T there.
Is that, you know, in Jewish law, Jews are prohibited from simply digging up graves and then taking DNA samples. That's totally unacceptable. And in fact, in Israel, whenever there's some kind of construction going on and they find the remains of some ancient cemetery, they have to take all kinds of precautions. They can't immediately dive in and start, dissecting the remains of these ancient people who lived there. So there's always been a great difficulty in actually conducting this research. But I'm very grateful to my colleague, Dr. Ellie Dolgan, who is a science writer who shared with me this fascinating preprint study that's going to be appearing in a very prestigious journal soon. And it gave us the results of a new study that comes out of Erfurt, Germany. Let me show you that study and explain how it depicts in much greater detail the genetic history of early Ashkenazi Jews. So first of all, it's dealing with this site in Germany, the city of Erfurt, which has a known, well-documented Jewish community living there. The title of the article is Genome-wide Data from Medieval German Jews Show that the Ashkenazi founder event predated the 14th century. And there are over 20 authors from really prestigious institutions all over the world, led by S. Waldman, putting together this amazing piece of research. It's about 100 pages long in total. I was so fascinated to read it. Here's a photograph of the actual discovery itself. It's a cemetery just outside the city walls of ancient Erfurt or medieval Erfurt. You can see in the top picture, the city wall is just there on the right, and in the bottom you see actually the discovery of the remains. Now, once it was suggested that these were in fact Jews, the study actually went to some of the most premier authorities of Jewish law to ensure that the remains were treated with the proper respect. In fact, the research was conducted entirely on teeth that were detached from the skulls of the deceased, which constitutes a different category of remains, and it was much more lenient with regards to assessing the DNA in those teeth. Also fascinating, they looked at differences in the enamel and were able to identify, in fact, that some of the remains came from a slightly different location earlier. Absolutely fascinating research. But what I really want to focus on is this idea of the founder event and something called a genetic bottleneck, which together gives us a much clearer picture of how Jews came to
Ashkenaz. So yes, again, fair use on
the
this
University
one right
of
here.
Dundee's Centre for Anatomy and Human Identification,
Norwich is
the History Cold Case team is embarking on a major new investigation.
Ladies, today's case, medieval Norwich. We've got disarticulated remains of at least 17 people.
Using a mobile forensic lab, the team has come to Norwich, where recent archaeological investigations have unearthed a major and chilling new find. The remains of 17 people at the bottom of a medieval well.
Hunted down these people.
Disarticulated, which means we're not looking at single burial, so presumably it's a mass grave.
The bodies include men, women, and young children. The local community needs answers. Who were these people? And how did their remains end up down a well? The possibilities are horrific.
But it shows
some
E
debate as to whether the
and
children were
T,
dead,
and I
whether they were
believe
well.
also
We go
some
back to a
J's
shocking period of
in Norwich,
widespread religious
where the
persecution and
majority of
genocide.
They haven't applied normal Christian tradition. They've completely ignored it.
As the trail reveals new proof about one of the most shameful episodes in British history.
So we see the bottleneck on the DNA. And then we also have the chapel field going back to the Peki'in Cave. This is very unique, you know, unbroken chain. I think there's only one other DNA that could do something similar to this. I think it's some J's. I know there's one with the also tell Megiddo, the elites, which happen to be haplogroup E over there. So that would, you know, being an elite at that time frame in that region, it probably would be somebody associated with the Phoenician, Canaanite, Punic speaking peoples. And you know, it's fascinating. Like I said, I think this is one of the best ways to line up your genealogy. Haplogroup T, I'm not saying that it's 100% provable that it's the Semites. I'm just saying it has the strongest case. And like I said, when you look at the Holy Land, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, the diversity of T in the region, when we look at T being very low in the pre-pottery Neolithic, and then getting an abundance and an enrichment and population boom, the Peki'in Cave is the best proxy. Also given to the fact of the Ossuary burial practice, which would be the proto-Israelite burial practice. When we look at the latest paperwork, you know, talking about the pastoralism in North Africa, when we also look at the early Christians of North Africa and the elite burials that were exclusively haplogroup E, showing that these were the native indigenous Sudanese people, and the only outlier was haplogroup T. Amongst this elite Sudanese Nubian Christians, it becomes very clear and very apparent that T is the outlier. Looking at the migration pattern of T-M70, it's zigzagging back and forth and circling the Mediterranean, bringing advancements. It's pretty clear. Some people say, you know, somebody has to be the Arameans, somebody has to be the Phoenicians, somebody has to be the Punic. Haplogroup T does fit more of the Semite thing. I don't think anybody would argue that. These people likely were proto-Semites, became the Israelites, converted into Christianity, and then were converted again into Islam.
Its Jewish problem. The crossroads of the empires. At the dawn of the 7th century, the two great empires of Byzantine and Persia confronted each other across the Middle East. The Byzantine Empire to the west of Arabia was the descendant of the classical Roman Empire and was almost completely Christianized. To the east was the Persian Empire, extended all the way to Afghanistan. Neither empire attempted to control the Arabian Peninsula. The vast desert was simply of little interest. Political loyalty of the Arabs was affixed to their tribal group, which was a social, political, and military alliance. The Arabian Desert was, and still is, a world where a lone individual can quickly perish. Only by allying with others could one hope to stay alive in the harsh desert reality. Religions of Arabia. The Arabs were polytheists. The religions included worship of astral divinities, such as Alat, a sun goddess. Arabs made sacrifices and offerings to deities, embodied in trees or sacred rocks. By the year 600 AD, just prior to the life of Muhammad, Christian and Jewish settlements were prevalent in Arabia, especially in the oasis town of Yathrib. The city of Yathrib, later Medina, lay 250 miles in an oasis north of Mecca. The 11 main clans of Yathrib included 3 Jewish tribes, Qurayza, Anadir, and Kainuka. The politics of Yathrib was characterized by fighting, strife, and disorder among the Arab tribes, with the Jews acting as a counterbalance. Muhammad expected Christians and Jews to accept him as the latest of God's prophets, the final extension of their monotheistic beliefs. When acceptance did not come, Muhammad was greatly disappointed. Arab polytheists simply did not take him seriously in a society of many faiths and gods. The Hijra. In the year 622, tribesmen from Yathrib met Muhammad at a fair where he was preaching. They embraced Muhammad for two reasons. First, the Jews of Yathrib had familiarized them with the idea of the coming of a prophet. Second, they thought Muhammad, as a religious figure, might unite the people of Yathrib and provide a solution to their communal strife. Muhammad immediately ordered his followers to leave Mecca and immigrate to Yathrib. Following the Hijra, Yathrib became known as Medina, the Arabic word for city, as in the city of the Prophet. The Hijra marked the start of a new chapter in the history of humanity, the conflict with the Jews. Relations steadily broke down between Muhammad and the Jewish tribes of Medina. The Jews could not accept that Muhammad, a Meccan merchant, was their Messiah or prophet of God. For the Jews, if a prophet arising among Gentiles was genuine, then their basic ideology of Jews being God's chosen people was false. For Muhammad, if the Jews did not accept his prophethood and still maintain power and prominence in Medina, then he could not genuinely be God's prophet and messenger. The first expulsion of Jews. Days later, Muhammad decided to rid Medina of Jews who had ridiculed his claim to prophethood. A large party of Muslims besieged them for 15 days in their strongholds. The Kainuka clan finally surrendered. They agreed to leave Medina with their families, but leave behind their arms and goldsmiths' tools. The second expulsion of Jews. In August 625, Muhammad demanded a contribution of blood money from the Jewish tribe of Anadir. The Jews refused, so he gave them an ultimatum: leave Medina within 10 days or be killed. They would retain ownership of their palm trees and receive part of the produce. The Jews again refused, and a 15 days siege resulted. Anadir lost heart when the Muslims began destroying their palm trees. They agreed to Muhammad's original demand, but now he imposed less favorable terms. They were to leave their weapons behind and have nothing from the palms. Anadir agreed and departed in a caravan of 60 camels for the settlement of Khaybar, 70 miles to the north. Houses and palm trees belonging to the Jews were allotted to the Muslims. Muhammad concluded that the Jews of Qurayza had been guilty of treasonable acts against the Ummah because they had been in contact with the Meccans. A 25-day siege began. Eventually, the Qurayza asked Muhammad to be allowed to surrender on the same terms as Anadir. Instead, Muhammad appointed a judge, Sa'd ibn Muwada, to decide the fate of the Jews. The judge decided, "I condemn the men to death, their property to be divided by the victors, their women and children to be slaves." The sentence was carried out on the following day, as the Muslims slaughtered 900 men. The women and children were sold into slavery, and the Jews' land and possessions were divided amongst the Muslims.
When they went to the Lemba in South Africa, they also find Haplogroup T there. When they go to Iraq, amongst the Iraqi Jews, they find LT over there, also T. When they go to the black Jews of India, they also find LT over there. When they go to the Yemenis Jews, they also find T over there. When they go to Sephardic Jews, they find a heavy presence of T over there. When they go amongst the Ramanite Jews, they find T also there. Actually, the website Avutenu is anonymous. It's hard to gather a lot from that group. The website JewishDNA.net, that's an interesting website. I found a connection to AB162, and if you read the description, it says, this branch is in the T group of Jewish branches. Their known genealogical origin is in Egypt and Morocco. This branch is a member of the Sephardic branch and a member of the Romanite branch. One other interesting thing is Thomas Jefferson is on this branch here. When you look up at the top of this branch, we have BY28282. Its downstream would be FT402 1388. We have 2 descendants in Gambia, and the time frame for that is unknown. This is at the very top of this branch. My connection with Thomas Jefferson, sharing a common ancestor, is very rare. It's 1 in 5,300. Only 47 customers currently are that closely related to Thomas Jefferson. You could also look up this paper, Thomas Jefferson, the Johnny Cake Papers. It claims that Thomas Jefferson was black and Indian squaw or mulatto. It also, there's the paper from the New York Times. Was Thomas Jefferson the first Jewish president in history? You could look that one up, because Thomas Jefferson definitely is found straight back to Egypt. And when you look at the T-FT15978 branch, which I'm a part of, which splits off of PF744, which Thomas Jefferson also splits off of, you see that there's one Egyptian, one Lebanese that shares borders, and then there's me, Puerto Rico. So on the Y full tree, I reported as Israel. And when you look at these countries lined up like that, border to border to border, it becomes very apparent. And when you look at the GPS coordinates, it makes complete sense. So, yeah, Thomas Jefferson, he likely comes from Middle Eastern people. Also, Spencer Wells also said this, that his ancient DNA goes back to the land of Canaan. So
everything about Jefferson points to him being European. Genealogists have traced his ancestry back to medieval France and Britain. But the test reveals something you might never have imagined. Jefferson's Y chromosome links him not to Europe, but to the Middle East, what is now Lebanon and Syria. This is the best guess. A direct ancestor who lived in a land that no longer exists, called Phoenicia. The Bible calls it Canaan. Jefferson may look European, but his Y chromosome tells a different story. It shows that what we look like may not really tell us where we come from. And it raises a question mark over the traditional image of Adam. For centuries, artists have depicted him like this, like a European.
So personally, I'm one of 81 people that are closely related to the Kulubnarti 6340. It's 1 in 3,100. So it's a fairly rare connection there. My second highest connection is the Shikarat 2. 94 people share a common ancestor with this result, and it's 1 in 2,007 people. Then it's Shikarat 3, which is 1 in 1,500. Only 170 customers are closely related to this one there. We have the other Kulubnarti. It's the same, 1 in 170. Also the same with Legato, which is in Russia. It was associated with the Vikings. This is extremely interesting when you look into it. It has a history of the oldest Arabian dinar ever found in Europe, at at least 90 to 95% of all dinars that went through this area here, making it a significant trading post on a couple of maps of different trading routes. One that I find the most interesting is the Rhodanite Jewish trading routes that stretched all the known world at the time. It's a very amazing find. And then when you look at this particular mutation and how rare it is, over there is less than 1% in Russia. And even when we go upstream, it still remains less than 1%. Even when we go higher upstream, it still remains at less than 1%. That's fascinating. Then we have the Peki'in Cave 1165. That one there is a 1 in 179. So it goes much lower there, but there's only 1,396 customers that are closely related to the Peki'in 1165. And this is associated with the Chalcolithic Israel culture. It was the most abundant stash of ancient DNA found yet in Israel. It was 9 samples of T, 1 sample of a EV32 branch, if I'm not mistaken. And After that, we go down. We got a couple of locations in Turkey with the Alalek 110, with the Alalek 110, Alalek 138. That's over in Turkey. That's also dated to the Bronze Age Anatolia, which will put us right in the region and right in the proper time frame of the Israelites. Then we have Megiddo, which this is a fascinating find here. This is a Levantine Bronze Age find at Tel Megiddo, more popularly known as Armageddon. This is fascinating. It's a rare connection, 1 in 179. Only 1,396 customers are closely related to Megiddo there. We share a common ancestor that goes back 6,550 years BCE, so that's about 8,000 years ago. So if you're a young Earth believer, the science kind of contradicts that, but I feel using this genetic research is a good tool, and it's probably one of the best ways to show or prove a connection to the Holy Lands. We also got Abel Beth Maach on here, which is another fascinating find. When you look at the time frame of that's associated with the Galilean culture, and that's in the Levantine Iron Age, which that's exactly where we would want to find it. And that there's a story in the Bible about Abel Beth Maach. Also, they excavated a Semitic style bust of a head, and again, Abel Beth Maach finds is upstream of the Erfurt, and this is used to validate the Middle Eastern connection of the Ashkenazi Jews. And then we also have the chapel field going back to the Peki'in Cave. This is very unique, unbroken chain. We have to take into account the ancient remains. These ancient remains have a story to tell. We're gonna have to let that story tell itself. No matter how impartial my approach may be, some people are still gonna be biased and not want to accept things that are fairly obvious. So when we just look at the DNA, we don't even add nothing to it. And somebody with Haplogroup T, they're gonna see how closely they're related to people from Palestine, from the Galilee, mainstream Jewish community. And then when we go into ancient finds, we find the same DNA there. But then after doing my own DNA and then digging deeper, and I'm saying, wow, like people are just pushing one narrative. This thing is popularized. Everybody's buying into it. But then when you really start to take off those layers of that onion, you're gonna cry and they stink up the place, whatever. But the reality is, it is what it is. The average person, they're not gonna dig deep. They're just gonna take whatever somebody tells them and run with it. And not really gonna do the research themselves. I would be remiss if I didn't at least give an honorary mention or just a notable mention to Dr. Nathaniel T. Jensen and his book Traced. This book is like over 250 pages, and it has about 24 pages of citations and showing his sources and explaining why he came to his conclusion that he did. I don't know this guy. Obviously, he doesn't know me, but I think when he was looking at it, this guy wrote this book, Traced, over 250 pages, and he come to the conclusion that Haplogroup T is the Israelites. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H being Ham. He's using an unrooted tree. When you look at IJ, he's saying that's Japheth. So Haplogroup K, he would say is Shem. And out of Shem, he designates Haplogroup T as the Israelites. So Nathaniel Jensen is the only geneticist that is lining up the Bible with genetics. He's the only person brave enough to do that. I haven't really seen any people, peer review the book or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's just because it's considered like a sci-fi fantasy book and pseudo. But I will tell you this, the man was brave enough, bold as a lion to come out with a book like this. Definitely stepped on a lot of toes. At the end of the day, yeah, he's saying IJ is Japheth, K is Shem. I would have designated IJ more as Idumean. Personally, I would have put them as Idumean due to the Rothschild relation. The Kohen, the way that's such a major, the powerful people that push the Kohen agenda. Like, Bennett Greenspan, who wants to put haplogroup T in Lebanon. When you look at his own website, Family Tree DNA, T is barely represented in Lebanon. There's no significance to Lebanon. I think it's not even in the top 20 places on their website. Its frequency is very low. I think it's maybe 5%, maybe lower than that. So there's nothing significant there. Somalia is more significant for haplogroup T than Lebanon. And honestly, even Israel is more significant than Lebanon. And you know, nothing against Lebanon at all, but I feel like his information is outdated. He keeps on trying to push this Lebanon thing with the National Geographic. Spencer Wells, he actually didn't do it. It was the narrator for that segment right there. That said, trace it to Lebanon and Syria. They didn't want to say Israel, but yeah, everybody knows the land of Canaan is Israel. So I just wanted to make the point that Benny Greenspan, he paid for all of these kits to be done on all of these people for free. And then when it comes to poor little haplogroups like T, we don't have powerful people pushing their agenda for us. Even E has mad people, powerful movement behind it pushing for E. T is so tiny, honestly, when it comes to the worldwide population, because it's really just from a small area and then got fragmented and shattered and scattered, where it is very few amongst the nations that they really don't want to hurt nobody's feelings. But when you're being attacked and your back is against the wall, it's only right for you to defend yourself. That's human nature. That's not one particular person's nature. That's anybody's nature. Shout out to the Alabama brawl. People, once they get fed up, they're going to react and they're going to want to, hold it down. The same way we saw that happen, you're going to see people coming in the name of being an Israelite and defending it. I'm sorry to tell you, you're not going to be ready and prepared for the type of battle that these people are going to bring forth. And my video here is a perfect example of that. Like the average dude is not going to be able to do what I just did right now. And actually, at least 30 to 40% of the dudes that is thinking one way, once they do go this deep into this rabbit hole, should we say, they're gonna find something out that is gonna shake them to their core. You know what I mean? And especially if you find out you're an Israelite, definitely you're gonna say, wow, I need to change the way I'm living for real. And this responsibility that is put upon me, that's a heavy load to carry in this day and age, because you have to understand your ancestors have been persecuted. And yeah, it's not going to just be black and white. It's going to be a lot of shades of gray in there. It's a very pivotal time that you should definitely get your house in order and get yourself in order. Every day is precious. I'm going to put all the links to the sources in the description. Be sure to check that out. Just don't take my word on it. You can fact check everything that I've said here. I don't really have much time and the resources to put it all together, but eventually one day I really want to do more of a professional documentary style deep dive on haplogroup TM184. I wish everybody the best, and just serve the Most High God. It doesn't matter what your genealogy is, what your DNA results say. It just matters your sincerity and your devotion to God, to love Him with all your heart and all your soul. With that, I'm going to sign off. Please share, like, subscribe, and comment. Appreciate you. All the best. Shalom.